to see all you guys here. This has been a really great afternoon so far, and I'm hoping that at the end of the presentation today that you'll agree that this is probably one of the highlights of the academic year this day here at the University of Maryland School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation. Today's lecture is the legacy of a person I think of as kind of a dean of Washington, D.C. architecture, Coleman Florence. Coleman started a Koch Florence, as he's known by his friends. He started a firm in D.C. Called Kai's Condon Florence, and it was a really progressive firm, and it eventually it changed its name, and then it got bought by another firm, and merged with eventually the Smith Group. And the University of Maryland colleagues who were in that firm with Koch decided that they would establish an endowment in his honor. Now, Koch, like our sponsor of the colloquium earlier, is traveling today, even though we told him back in August when we knew the date for this that he was unfortunately had scheduled to be traveling. He's not able to be here today, but it's part of a living legacy that one does when one has success in the field. One passes it back on to the next generation. And so for now and into the infinite future, there will be Coleman Florence's lectures, but I imagine this is going to be one of the memorable ones. And I have a big dilemma here because I started asking myself this morning, actually I asked myself a long time ago, how does one introduce Deborah Berke? You know, there should be no need to tell you who she is and just how accomplished she is as an architect. If you don't know her, you just haven't been paying any attention. I've been trying to get Deborah to come back here for quite some time to College Park. And last summer I sent her 30-some dates. They were all Fridays, starting in September, reaching all the way to this date in May, or in April. And eventually Deborah picked the date. And I said in that email I sent to her, Deborah, here's 30 dates. You don't have an excuse. You gotta come. Deborah Berke is no stranger to University of Maryland. In the 1980s, she taught here and made tremendous contributions to the quality of design education here back when we were a little old School of Architecture. We've grown since then. Yes, indeed. In fact, actually, if you Google Deborah Berke and Mark McInturk, immediately 40 Buildings pops up from Architecture 445. I still have a copy of that in my office, a great addition to the school. In 1987, Deborah left the university to move her practice to New York, leaving a vacancy on the faculty, and that line was open, and eventually I was hired to fill that position. And I always feel that I never quite lived up to Deborah's promise. I always feel an affinity to Deborah as a consequence of that, and I've been watching her and her spectacular career from a distance. While in New York, Deborah balanced her practice with teaching at Yale, where she was eventually appointed dean, and still is dean. And the fact that she's here on a Friday night, smiling, alert, and ready to go, it tells me that she's got incredible stamina. She's, over the years, her practice flourished and gained international notoriety. In fact, in some circles, Deborah Berke is a household word, which admittedly is a unique thing for architects. I say this, I have evidence of this. In the movie Columbus, I'm sorry, I have to do this. In the movie Columbus, if you haven't seen it, you need to go out and rent it or buy it and watch it this weekend. It's a great film. The camera works fantastic. The plot is intellectual. It is just a fabulous movie, and of course, Deborah figures into this thing. One of the main characters, Casey, who's played by Haley Lou Richardson, is totally enamored, perhaps all consumed with Deborah Berke as a better characterization. And in a scene with Jin, played by John Cho, Casey says, I'll try to capture this. I met Deborah Berke last year. Yeah, at the museum. They brought her here to discuss the Miller holes. She was amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the amazing Dean Deborah Berke, FAIA, back to Maryland for her personal home.
Wow. Well, Brian, that was incredibly sweet. A little bit of a spoiler alert, I have a picture from the movie a little later in my talk, but the part Brian doesn't know about that is I didn't know that I'm not physically in the movie, but my name is in the movie in the first 5 minutes. And I didn't know that was the case, but I had built a couple of buildings in Columbus, Indiana, and I had heard that the movie was a great way to see a lot of buildings. So I said to my daughter, her new boyfriend, and her best friend from high school, hey guys, Daddy's out of town. Let's go, come to this movie with me. So we go. There are like 6 people in the entire theater in some cool place in Lower Manhattan. We're sitting there. 5 minutes into the movie, my name is said very loud, and my daughter goes, oh, Mom. Okay, so now we'll start. It's really nice to be back here. I have very, very fond memories of teaching in this space, and it's nice to see lots of familiar faces here and even more young, happy, soon-to-be architect faces here as well. I know this is now more than just a School of Architecture, it's a School of Planning and Preservation as well, but I'm here to talk about architecture. And I'm an architect, so that makes some sense, but I think in truth it's actually pretty hard to talk about architecture. I'm going to use a few images from, can you see these things okay? It's very weird. It's so bright in here. It's fantastic as opposed to those sort of dark slanted rooms that feel miserable. But in any event, as long as you can all see the images, it's great. I'm going to use some images from our work as I pose a few questions about what it means to talk about architecture. A lecture, as you know, is linear. It has a beginning and an end, and architecture is not linear. It's simultaneously so many things. It can be about construction and development. It's definitely about testing and refining and rejecting and coming up with new design ideas and options. It's about materials and detailing and pattern and color and light and shadow. For me personally, the material part is particularly a fun part. So is drawing. For some of you in the room, this will resonate happily. This is ink on Mylar with Pantone that I made myself a very long time ago. For other of you, that sounds like, what? But drawing is another great part of the story of making and thinking like an architect, as is the balance between history and precedent and the creating of the new. I think making sure every project is environmentally responsible, sustainable, and resilient is another important part of talking about architecture. And I think we should also always talk about architecture in terms of experience, human experience, like the way a person moves past a building or through a space or inhabits it, uses it, takes it in as part of their day-to-day life. Because ideally, I think best architecture impacts daily life in a good and meaningful way. And I think we know a little too much about how bad architecture negatively impacts the life of citizens in cities and elsewhere. So tonight I'm going to try to talk about all these things in terms of some recent projects and hopefully weave them together in a way that makes some sense. I am often asked about my architectural approach in terms of minimalism, and while that's certainly been an aesthetic influence, I'd say that our work, at least compositionally, is more frequently driven by what I would describe as geometric purity. We tend to prefer visual simplicity over something that's very busy, and that's our compositional strategy, but that too is not the whole story. Because one of my favorite joys as an architect is to make a complex program with tons and tons going on within the walls, behind the walls, under the floorboards, and between the ceiling and the roof, look utterly natural and effortless. And that's true whether it's a studio or a hotel or a dormitory or truly flexible multi-purpose space. And I think it can be by using the simplest envelope possible, because a building doesn't really have to wear its complexity on its face. I think you discover that complexity through experiencing spaces again and again. In fact, I think a fairly complicated structure can appear simple and straightforward, and that approach can elevate big buildings, like the one we just saw, and clarify smaller ones, and maybe even cause someone to come back repeatedly for a slightly different experience each time, as this building, which starred in Columbus even more than I did. I think we want our understanding of architecture and the understanding of those who experience the architecture we make to be simultaneously about the inside, the outside, and the spaces in between. And maybe even provoke them to ask if the space as they experience it is defined by walls and floors, or art and furniture, or all those things together, and maybe even more. Does the architect actually make buildings and spaces to amplify and celebrate the work of others? I would say adamantly yes. And I think that that's true whether it is something you hold in your hand or something you see or smell or hear. So, okay, all those ideas. Enough question posing for now. Maybe we'll come back to some of those questions at the end. I'm going to show you six projects, in many more than 6 pictures, and ruminate a bit about them, and then ruminate a little bit more in between them. First is a building we recently completed in Columbus, Indiana. Indianapolis, my mistake, in Indianapolis, Indiana. Cummins, as you may know, is based in Columbus, Indiana, and they recently built a new headquarters for one of the branches of their business. Historically, they are from Columbus. They are the people behind the great buildings in Columbus, and they will always be based in Columbus. So this was a bit of internal corporate politics. Anyhow, that's irrelevant to what I'm talking about. The building is situated on the main street of Indianapolis. It's called Market Street. It's 3 blocks from the War Memorial, which is at the center of the city. That's in the circle in this plan to the left. But you can see, even in this drawing, which shows some of the new construction, that the density of the city fades away very quickly as you move away from the War Memorial at the center. You can see the building from the War Memorial, and in fact, this is the view of it from there. But you get a clear sense of what it's like as you turn the corner and see it from the south, where it opens to a park we created. The Cummins folks bought an entire city block, and this was an invited design competition, this project, and our initial proposal was, don't build on the whole block. You could have met their program in a 3-story building that covered the whole block. Build on the street, reinforce the street wall, which is failing, provide a park for the city, and also allow yourself the opportunity to build more in the future. The light-filled lobby has an entrance both on the Market Street side, which is on the left in this image, as well as one from the park. And in the center of this image, you see stairs that go up to the 2nd floor. And at the top of those stairs, which is at the sort of center left in this floor plan, you arrive essentially where the people who are coming from the parking garage arrive at the revolving door, and you see the bridge there. And the idea was about as unimportant as it sounds, it meant a lot to them, and I think it is important. This is the way in which architects kind of can contribute to, in this instance, corporate community culture, is that everybody, in effect, arrives at the same place. There's no back door, front door. That matters how you get to work. You can park your bike on the bike stand in the park and come in and go up the stairs. You can walk down the street or take the bus down the street and come in and go up the stairs. You can drive to the garage and walk across the bridge, and everybody arrives at the same place where there is food and coffee to reinforce the sense of community. So the rest of this floor is a training center with meeting rooms, classrooms, private workspace, little event spaces and stuff like that. So you can see that connection that I'm talking about, the two-floor connection in this section. It's the lowest and largest of the 4 stacked blue outlined areas. And it sets the spatial idea for the rest of the building, that there are 3 double height areas that connect people visually and socially. Each of the 3 hubs, as they started to be called over the design process, has a different staircase to create neighborhood identities within the building. This is a look at the stadium stair seating, which connects floors 7 and 8. And here you see that a little bit further away from the open office area. And the way Cummins decided to do this, because so many of their staff travel, is it's a hot desk corporate model. So you choose what desk you want on the day you're there. They provide a variety of different kinds of experiences, lighting, of course, desk height and all that kind of stuff, and then private workrooms, medium-sized workrooms, large conference rooms, etc., so that the daily experience is what the employee needs that day. And you can see in the floor plan even the variety of desk orientations, and there are treadmill desks and every other thing you could possibly imagine, but there are typical open office layouts, none of them too dense, and then flexible meeting rooms and the social hub in the center. This stair and another social hub, we called it the pretzel stair during design development. It connects floors 5 and 6. And then the straight run stair, which has an open kitchen, connects floors 3 and 4. And you can see that these spaces are daylit from the south, and they have a mural, the bright colored thing on the left, on the right-hand side of this image, that altogether through the hub spaces is 6 stories tall. The idea of the very narrow floor plate allowed the building to be completely daylit, and that in turn then required passive shading elements, horizontal shades and vertical fins that vary in depth depending on location, and a fair number of opaque panels that help increase insulation at the envelope and provide places for solid walls and privacy within where appropriate. Cummins basically employs engineers, and they loved this. We told them that the facade had been calibrated, and as long as we convinced them that it was scientifically calibrated, they were very happy. We didn't tell them that it was both scientific and compositional. But anyway, that would be our little secret. In the photograph where I pointed out the mural that I said was 6 stories tall, actually by an interesting artist named Odili Donald Odada, who is a Nigerian-American painter based in Philadelphia. We had really interesting artists involved in the work in this building. But you can see the fenestration pattern, which has less screening at the social hub center part of the building. Had to do a lot to do with the activity there, no screen work. Allows the art to also be an experience for those outside in the park, and that's as true for Cummins employees using the park as it is for any citizens who might hang out there. When we started on this project several years ago, as I said earlier, this piece of Market Street was virtually empty. Now you can see in the bottom left of this image, there's a Whole Foods across the street, so you're seeing urban change in action. And in fact now a residential building, not a particularly good design, but you can see it reflected in our facade. And the building has become a trigger for 24/7 life now in downtown Indianapolis, which I'm very happy to see. So development has now continued further out on Market Street. So the next project I'm going to show you is in rural western upstate New York, just off of Lake Erie. If you have any sense of the geography of upstate New York, this is closer to Cleveland than it is to Syracuse, in a very cold and very snowy area. In the 1960s, the architects Harry Cobb, James Freed, and I.M. Pei used modernist planning and a distinctive design language to create a remarkable and austere campus for the State University of New York. And a ring road, which you can see in this black and white image, defined that pure plan for the campus. But as you can see from this aerial photograph, many decades later, campus authorities didn't stick to the rigor of the original plan. And at that red square, in the center of the circle is a building called the Rockefeller Arts Center, built when Nelson Rockefeller was governor of the state of New York and advocating for arts programs throughout the state. In its design, its front had addressed the loop on the right, and its back faced the other direction. Unfortunately, the other direction became the center of campus with a large parking lot, and that in turn became the point of arrival for visitors to the building, which has 2 theaters in it. So they entered through a long blank concrete wall that had one opening, which was the loading dock. So we were hired to do a 60,000 square foot addition to this building and fix those various problems. To put it in context, this is the architectural character of the campus. It's essentially monumental board form concrete buildings. The Rockefeller Arts Center is bottom right, completed in 1968. But you get the sense of the campus. And I must say parenthetically, as much as I actually love this kind of architecture, it is the least environmentally appropriate work for a place where the snow doesn't melt till June. And all of these vast windows were single pane glass, but we'll come back to that later. So this is a site plan of the Rockefeller Arts Center today. The back of the building is now the front, which was done through our addition, which is in red in this drawing. So the addition added a new entrance, gave it a front where the parking lot is and where people arrived, and allowed a more seamless connection to the rest of the arts buildings on campus. We did dozens and dozens of massing studies to consider how best to add on to the Pay building and how the new building would essentially relate to the existing. So we decided to punch through Pay's long concrete wall, which is the gray in this drawing, in 2 places. And that was really one of the biggest challenges, to figure out how to locate all the points of access and connection because of the different users in the building. Theater goers, students, faculty, the arrival of raw materials for all kinds of arts, stage sets, musical instruments, and the like, all in one facade. And because the material palette was so strong and so limited on campus, we thought not how not to use it, but how to use it in new ways. And what you see in this image is the long blank wall I was describing earlier, truly long, truly blank. The loading dock is just atop what was our mock-up for our new concrete that would be part of our design. So we decided to develop a distinctive diagonal board form to differentiate our work from the work of our predecessors. And we learned happily, it's interesting to use the word predecessors there because I'm talking about architects, but we learned early in the project that the legacy of the construction of the 1968 campus was a local expertise in architectural concrete work. So sons and grandsons of the people who had built the campus in the 60s were still doing concrete work, and it was some of the best. It's hard to find good quality concrete work in the United States, and actually the quality of what they were able to do here is extraordinary. So there's many kinds of predecessors in the story of this building, which is a lovely thing. Anyhow, we wanted to work with the play of light and shadow and the color of the concrete. It's not meant to be, very intentionally not meant to be pristine, but meant to be rugged and textured. And just as we did at the Cummins building in Indianapolis, we thought a lot about how light breaking across surfaces would establish shadows and how to calibrate not only the texture of the concrete, but also the relationship of the metal and the glass. So we actually, in the end, inverted Pay's material palette, more glass, more surface texture, less concrete. And in this side elevation, you can see our work on the right in relationship to his on the left. And from far away and kind of dead on, you can imagine the drawing where the materials and the horizontal lines are all continuous, and the rhythm of fenestration sort of is in dialogue with the older building. But as you see it from an angle, you catch a more complex three-dimensional relationship, both between the two buildings and then within the compositions of our sort of stacked strategy as well. So we gave the facade depth to decrease solar gain and to provide the building texture and rhythm, as I just said. But we also wanted our building to allow students and the public to see the activities going on inside in a way that the Pei building did not allow. So you could see the pianos silhouetted in the slightly cantilevered big dance studio on the second floor. You can see who, not in this picture, but you can see who's hanging out in the cafe below. And you see the cafe here. The building hadn't yet opened. That's a guy who works for me. I'm taking a break. But you can see how the concrete, which we brought from the outside to the inside as part of our very kind of tough, limited palette of materials. So this is the new entrance. So there's a proper place to walk in, and you're sheltered from the snow while you find your ID card that procs into the building. And one of the interesting things about the building, I mentioned the arts and talked about the fact that there are big theaters inside, but on this campus it houses almost all of the arts, so performing, applied, theater arts other than acting, and artisanal. So here you see the new ceramic studio in our building, and this is one of the sculpture studios. I went to art school as an undergrad, and I love these kind of spaces, the sort of, there's no real visible architecture, and I'm kind of proud of that, because it's a space where the work of others is more important than the work of the architect here for the people learning to become artists. So here you see the welding foundry. There was actually care taken in the coordination of the pipes and mechanical systems here. I care about those kind of things. And here you see that big daylit dance studio I was talking about before. It's a space for practice, for instruction, and a space for small public performances. You see the fold-down seating on the side. Its materials are also basic and inexpensive, other than the sprung floor. But the light and the proportions make it a really stunning space to work in. And as I said, I think that's important. Places where you work should be beautiful. They shouldn't be luxurious necessarily, but by proportion and light and composition, they should be beautiful. So the building has become a marker of all performance and art study on campus in exactly the way we intended. I'm delighted about that. I won't say and when you go there, because I don't know how often anybody actually goes to Fredonia, New York, but should you go there, check out the building. And what you can, what I'm building on from that is that in our practice, we work with a lot of old buildings to transform them for contemporary life. Some, like that one in Fredonia that we just looked at, is a new building essentially attached to a building that's only 50-something years older. And it was designed by I.M. Pei, and this is a happy coincidence, Brian. Today is his 102nd birthday. He's still alive, as you all know. But most of the older men that I collaborate with are dead. And I've had the privilege of collaborating with some pretty amazing architects: Albert Kahn, Louis Kahn, H.H. Richardson, Shreve Lamb and Harmon, and McKim and White, all of whom are pictured here. This posthumous collaboration, let's call it. This trio is an interesting one. H.H. Richardson, Thomas Story Kirkbride, and Frederick Law Olmsted. Now you've heard of two of these people, I assume, and probably not Kirkbride, who was a 19th century psychiatrist from Philadelphia, who developed a form of mental hospital with such a distinct floor plan that it is called the Kirkbride Plan. Had to do with mental health care. We might look at it as unappealing today, but it was the first real attention paid humanely to what we now call PTSD in the decades following the Civil War. So one of the most famous of the Kirkbride buildings is the one in Buffalo, New York, designed by H.H. Richardson with a landscape by Frederick Law Olmsted. It is an extraordinary structure with a very powerful presence, even when it was abandoned, which is what you can see in this photograph. We were asked to renovate the center of it, which are the three buildings in solid red in this drawing, but also in this plan you can see that it was once more than 2,500 feet long, that's half a mile, before the three wings on the right-hand side were torn down to make space for a new psychiatric hospital in the 1960s. It looked like this when we started, including the terrible addition at the lower center of this photograph, which is from the 1940s. The stone, which is a red sandstone, was stunning, but had not been maintained nor even repointed in more than 100 years. The building is a load-bearing masonry structure, so in most locations the walls were 3 feet thick, particularly around the perimeter. And you can see both the derelict state as well as some of the beautiful proportions and details in its original construction. This is what it looked like when we first went inside. The original patient rooms were really tiny, and given the thickness of the walls that separated the rooms, we could only do limited demolition, particularly Buffalo has a certain seismic rating, so you really couldn't undo too much of this building. And what you did undo, you had to undo very carefully. There were occasional treasures in the building, like this fireplace, but essentially what you felt when you were in there was pathos. And you felt the presence of many sad stories despite the awesomeness of the architecture. The landscape was restored to much of what Olmsted had originally designed. Part of the cure was to work in farming fields when you were well enough to be outside. And one of the reasons you saw those very wide hallways is because when you weren't well enough to go outside, the hallways faced south and you sat in the hallway all day in the sunshine. The landscape has not quite grown in this image, but you can see it just planted, and you can see our new entrance addition beyond within it, which is our new lobby. And you can see in this photograph what is a very clear architectural strategy, which is you don't mess with Richardson, and in fact you don't compete with Richardson either. You put in the smallest, clearest, least heavy thing you possibly can do to let his heaviness continue to sing. So within our new lobby is a new stair that brings one to the second floor, which is actually the main floor and the hotel's lobby. Beneath it, where you see the people, you can walk through to a sort of architectural archive, bathrooms and things like that. Further up in the center of the building, we added additional stairs and bridges so that you could access previously hidden rooms, and so that we could create new vistas through the building and so that people could understand their movement through it in a more logical way. We added color in a lot of locations to complement and celebrate original volumes and spaces. And we restored original details wherever we could, although we never, and this is an absolute rule for me in a practice that does a lot of adaptive reuse, we never imitate or copy what we find. We do new. And repair old when it can be repaired. You can see the quality of the detailing here on the old stairs, and here in the curved connector between the main building and one of the wings, which has glorious tile floors that were actually in really good shape after 150 years. Here's that fireplace now in a new lounge area, not yet furnished in this image. And this is one of these long south-facing hallways which we restored and added. You'll see here just those little white volumes on the left side of the hallway, and that was literally to make bathroom layouts work because the hallways were 16 feet wide and 18 feet tall, and the rooms were only 11 feet wide. And in fact, one of the ways we got this project was because the original proposal was, we'll just drill the hallway down the middle of the old rooms and turn the big fat hallway into what the guest rooms should be. It's like, are you kidding? That destroys the soul of the building. So we won that argument, thankfully, but we did have some problems with making the rooms work. So you can see here in plan the extent of the renovation. A center building with food, restaurants, bars, and kinds of classrooms, meeting rooms, and conference centers. University of Buffalo is across the street, so the building actually gets a lot of use. And then hotel rooms on either side. If you look at this plan in a little more detail, you'll see those pump outs into the hallways really are to make working bathrooms in locations where otherwise the floor plan simply wouldn't work for a hotel. This is a guest room at a corner with windows on two sides, as you can see. And another one with a fantastic old column in it. And wherever we found things like this, we kept them, of course. Our small entry addition, and for the architects and the preservationists in the room, you'll see that the glass does not come out past the corner of the main block of stone, and that was a point that was our compromise with the preservationists about where the glass, we wanted to pull the glass further out, no way. So that's where the glass ended up. But the entry addition allows for a new balcony off the upper bar area, and for all of my talk about snow, this isn't that far from Fredonia. Summers in Buffalo are really beautiful, and this deck gets a lot of use. So I call this, particularly after its history, a happily re-inhabited building. I hear from guests how much they love it. And it won last year's top design prize from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And as somebody who had just written an essay called I'm Against Preservation, that'd be me. That was a really nice prize to get. So in addition to that, we do actually design a fair number of hotels, most of them for the 21C Museum hotel folks. It's not really a chain because every one of the 8 hotels is different, and 7 of the 8 are in adaptively reused buildings. This particular one is in Oklahoma City in a former Ford Motor Company assembly facility designed by the great American architect Albert Kahn. It has a stunning facade that we were happy to restore and really celebrate. Just its purity and repetitiveness was spectacular. The building is an entire city block long. But the floor plan, not just its length, but its depth was immense. I mean, it was literally a building you could drive a car around inside of. So we cut light shafts through. You see 3 of them here in this section. 2 are quite visible. And the floors were also heavily reinforced, again, because you could drive cars around inside the building. So we cut these holes, not easily, and the idea was to bring light down into the interior building and also to break up this vast depth so it would feel comfortable as a hotel. So you can see the bottom of one of these cuts in the ceiling in the lobby here, that circle in the ceiling. And if you haven't been to a 21C Museum hotel, they are full of provocative contemporary art that is not a marketing strategy, but the actual collection of the owner. And in addition to its beautiful facade, the building also had massive columns, which we celebrated as well, making them focal points. For instance, this one is in the bar. Again, you can see we didn't clean the paint off of it, just left it as we found it, really beautiful. And also in the hallways where we did paint them. And here you can see them marching down the interior of the guest floor. This is only about 1/3 of the way along the floor plan, so there are endless rows of these spectacular columns. And you can also see the presence of light shafts. So they light the hallway, and the 4th side of this light shaft is a guest room. So the inside of the light shafts look like this, and then the guest room that faces it looks like this. So the experience in these guest rooms is very different than those that are at those big windows on the exterior. And at the top of the building, we saved the old water tower for its character and took what had been a maintenance shed and turned it into the rooftop suite, which has a garden for outside entertaining. So This is another adaptive reuse project, also connected to the arts, but in a very different way. And like the Hotel Henry, it has a backstory. You didn't know you were going to get a history lesson tonight. These buildings were all designed, these 4 buildings were all designed by the architect C.B.J. Snyder, much less famous architect than Albert Kahn or H.H. Richardson, but arguably just as important, certainly in the city of New York, where he was the superintendent of school buildings from 1891 to 1923. He built over 400 New York City public schools himself and had his team do the rest of them, which is if you know New York at all and you wonder why when you drive by public schools they all look exactly the same, that's why, all by this guy. And one of his innovations was to design schools with H-shaped plans or empty lots next to them to create protected play areas. And that, you could build these mid-block, and the city was opening in the late 19th and early 20th century. There were a huge influx of immigrants to the city of New York, and they were opening hundred schools every couple of years. In any event, we just renovated one of C.B.J. Snyder's building, the old PS 122 in the East Village, which was on a corner lot and had a side lot playground next to it. So you can see it on the corner with the red rectangle here with its small side yard and a tiny little indentation in its roof plan. This is what it looked like when it was used as a school and when the elevated trains still ran on First Avenue. The building was later abandoned by the New York City Board of Education and was reoccupied by arts groups, guerrilla style, literally broke into the building and took it over in the early 1970s. Its elaborate cornice, which you see in this picture, had been removed long ago. And photos from what was happening there in the 70s are what you see on the right-hand side here. The building was wonderfully and woefully dilapidated by the time we were hired to re-envision it, although those artist groups were still in it, freezing in the winter, sweating in the summer, and fighting over who got to use what part of it. But it had beautiful, beautiful bones, handsome old details, and staircases and spaces like this within. So we decided to start with a bold move, which was to place the largest theater called Performance Space New York, where they do very experimental theater. If we put that on the top floor, we could raise the roof and create a column-free space. That required much less structural reinforcement. That meant we could meet our budget and do a few other things as well. And then what you see in this drawing on the left is a new circulation spine, both horizontal and vertical, which we built in the side yard where the playground had been. That was the other big move. It accommodates the many audiences that come to the building and the many constituencies that use the building, and also makes it ADA accessible, because the original building, you could only go up a very steep flight of stairs to get in. And it also allows more of the building to be used by the various tenant organizations, and it allows you also to get to the roof. So in that half H that you saw on the roof plan, you can see we added an elevator, bathrooms, a proper at-grade entrance, a plausible 21st century fire stair, because you can see the other stairs in the building, even in this plan from far away, don't look code compliant, they're not. And the former classrooms that you maybe saw in that plan, or remembered from the previous plan, on the right-hand side, have become painting studios, which are leased by an organization called Painting Space New York for artists who are short on funds to give them a place to be able to work. On the top floor here in plan, you see the new theater, and on what was the roof on the right, you see 2 new community workspaces and then access to the roof terrace at the bottom of the drawing. What was interesting in the process of designing this building, our client was the Department of Cultural Affairs of the City of New York. They're the landlords, in effect. But we spent most of our time talking to the 6 organizations that use the building, and they all said, whatever you do, don't make it too nice. And what I think they really meant by that was don't erase our history and all the interventions and things we did to this building over time that make it special. So the new theater looks like this. It's really raw space, not special until there's a performance going on in it. And we work to keep all the interventions in the building intentionally very visible. You're hearing this as my mantra. There's no fake gold in this building. And that's true whether it's in a room like that or in a detail here where you see a new stair railing going up on a new run of stairs behind the original old one. Intentionally very different. On the exterior, the idea was that the addition would have a presence, but not too much mass. The building itself is pretty solid and massive. It's clad in perforated stainless steel, and the idea is that it shimmers in the daylight with varying levels of transparency and allows the light to come out at night to indicate that there's stuff going on inside the building to neighbors and people from all over the city who are walking down First Avenue to be drawn in. And what you see here is actually our replacement cornice for the original ornate one. It's actually a bench and a guardrail for the roof terrace, and is now that spring is finally kind of here in New York, getting used once again, our first full year in operation in this building. So as at Fredonia, PS 122, where there's performance space and Mabu Mines and the painting and the community tenants and the dance group and the community behind all the communities that helped save what is now called Hotel Henry in Buffalo, we really love to have engaged clients and collaborators. And it's really a special privilege, I think, in our practice to be able to work with and for artists, because the dialogue is rich and the collaboration itself is meaningful. Not all of the artists we work with are traditional fine artists. You can see our working studio here for the Elizabeth Aikens Rug Company. So accounted for the needs of artisanal workers, weavers, dyers. These people sew the loom woven rugs together. And many years ago, we designed a new home for the Yale School of Art. One part of that project involved the radical renovation of the New Haven Jewish Community Center, a building with a facade by Louis Kahn. And the other, in that building, are studios and classrooms for photography, graphic design, undergraduate painting, and a theater for the Yale Drama School. But we also designed a new, immediately adjacent building for graduate painting. That's what you see here. This is the crit space. And the idea behind this building, the crit space would be the community space, and that the art students, graduate students, were to be treated like working artists with studios. And they each have their own workspace that they could make really feel their own while they were there at their time at Yale. And years later, I met an artist who had studied and worked in one of those spaces. His name is Titus Kafar, Yale MFA, and we met at one of the 21C museum hotels that I had designed. We had never met at Yale. But I was glad that our paths had crossed because we had a lot in common, both in terms of clients, collaborators, collectors, institutions, and certain really strongly held beliefs. This is in the 21C Museum Hotel in Louisville, which was the first one, and that was made out of old cotton and tobacco warehouses. And they used many of the spaces as gallery spaces. That was one of Titus's paintings, and here you see some of his more recent work. On the right is a print, currently part of a show at MoMA PS1 about incarceration of black males in the United States, and on the right is one of his large paintings which calls into question traditions of, let's say, grand American historic paintings of heroic men, heroic white men. Last month, Titus was featured in the New York Times. Maybe some of you saw it. It was a cover story in the arts section on a Sunday. And that article not only referred to Titus's work, but a project that he is involved with that I'm working on, is the one I'm about to show you. It's one that connects his work to what he believes about life, as art changed his life. He actually lived on the street at one point in his life. And he's now using art to change the lives of others. Last year, actually in the fall, this year, it was announced that he was one of the MacArthur Award winners, so there is respect, a lot of respect for both his art and what he's doing in his community. So this is the project that the Times was so interested in. This is pronounced Next Haven. It's located in the Dixwell neighborhood of New Haven. It's a building or a series of buildings with studio space, gallery space, community space, live work space for artists, and training and mentorship programs for students from the James Hillhouse High School, which you see the bigger building with the red line around it in this photograph. Next Haven occupies 2 abandoned factory buildings, one where medical equipment was made and one where ice cream was made. That was really a cool building. The inside walls were cork about this thick. Both those businesses closed decades ago, and more recently the buildings have been used, one for prostitution and one to manufacture counterfeit goods. So having Titus buy them with the help of the city of New Haven was already a positive change. Here's a plan of Dixwell. It's a medium density, mostly low-income neighborhood, close to Yale, but a world away from Yale, and I think what both Titus and I want to do is change that. Initially, we thought we'd retain the entire complex of buildings, but varying conditions made that more costly and complicated than it was worth. So we liked the idea of keeping the 2 original buildings that have some history to them. That's the one at the corner and the one on the right. And we built 2 new buildings, the dark gray one at the top and the one in the space between. I won't bother showing you all the plans, but on the ground floor there are 12 large artist studios, and on the left there's a large room for events and shared activities. The entry's in the middle, and the gallery beyond. I'm sorry, I went through that too fast. You enter in the middle, there's a gallery space there, and there will be 3 or 4 artists in residence, so there are live workspaces in the new building that will be built at the rear. It's a phased construction project as they raise money. So this is a rendering of the exterior. You see the new building on the left. The building all the way on the right, the low brick building, now has 8 working artists in it. They started their residencies in January, and I believe over 800 people applied for the 8 spots. Titus believes that Next Haven will be a new neighborhood anchor. I agree with him, and I certainly hope he's right. It's intentionally open and welcoming. It has a come in and see what we're doing sensibility about it. No grates that pull down over the glass. The ramp piece of it is circulation, but it's also intended to be a hangout space. As in many of the projects I've showed you, the materials are tough. It's meant to be a working space. The old factory space where they made the test tubes has an original skylight in it, which we are replacing. This is the co-working space, community event space, give classes space, and in fact, next year, students from the Yale School of Architecture will be teaching architecture classes to high school students from New Haven in this space. And in the basement, there's a small jazz theater, again, speaking to the history of the neighborhood. This was New Haven's original jazz neighborhood, and New Haven has a long history of jazz, so bringing musicians back also mattered to Titus. These are the artists who are now in residence. Here's one of them in her studio, and the group posed with Titus in a nearby park. And we wanted the new building to feel different from the old buildings, has GFRC panels on it with a distinct profile, make the artists present and visible, but not overly visible, so that they felt they could do their work. So in some ways, are we making money on that job? So not. But there are other projects where you do. And I think that's one of the balances architects figure out. In fact, I was just on a panel last night in New York that talked about what are the models of practice that allow you to pay your rent, feed your family, and still be able to do work like this. And we like to, in my firm, work for local organizations and all kinds of organizations whose missions appeal to us. And sometimes those projects fall outside standard architect kind of fee-for-service practice or architect-client relationship. We host a lot of art exhibitions at our offices. This is Kiki Smith. We do not show her work, but she did like the work of one of the young artists we showed, so she came to the show. So this is a great community builder, both for our employees and for the arts community. We run workshops for kids. This one is at the Cooper Hewitt, but we do them in local schools as well. We want to be engaged and connected to to the world beyond the world of design insiders. So I have appeared on the Barefoot Contessa. That was, perhaps to Brian's comments at the beginning, the single most famous I have ever been in my life. My hair is fairly recognizable. I was walking down the street in New York and people would literally, it ran on whenever on Sunday morning, I have no idea, I don't watch it, but so people would come up and poke me, saw you on Ina, like it gave them the freedom, you know, to touch me. It was really weird. Anyhow, yes, so I've been on the Barefoot Contessa. And I've been on some podcasts. Some of them were meant to be funny. That is definitely more the host than me. That Michael Ian Black is actually a really funny guy, but this was a fun thing to do, and it certainly reached a community well beyond the community of architects. Because my goal is that architects and architecture be less intimidating and exist in a balance and conversation with the rest of life, with the rest of the forces of life. And that perspective has come in handy at my other job. For more than 30 years, I have supplemented practice with teaching, like when I was here. That was before I had actually figured out how to get clients to pay the bills, so I needed a teaching job. And 3 years ago, a little less than 3 years ago, I became the dean of the Yale School of Architecture. That was after Robert A. Stern had been dean for 18 years, so it was definitely a change in personality. I am used to thinking about our discipline, our profession, our work, and how we interact with the public in a pedagogic context as well as in a practice context. I hope I haven't bored you. I am coming to the end, folks, I promise. And since becoming dean, I've been trying to do that with even greater intensity. I think the position of dean at Yale is a pretty good bully pulpit for one's values about architecture and to try to put them into a broad range of action. I think these days, happily, it's fashionable for architects to want to respond to social needs. I think that's good, but I don't care that much that it's fashionable. At Yale, we have made social engagement a core of architectural education for more than 50 years, and our work with people like Mayor Hart, the woman here with the folder under her arm, who is actually a graduate of the Yale School of Architecture. You can study architecture and not practice. You can run for office. You can change your community. Is a nice example of how we try to broaden our pedagogic approach. Students build a house a year. They design it and build it. We donated to, since I became dean, we donated to an organization called Columbus House, which is run by a woman who's a graduate of the Yale Divinity School who's devoted her life to ending homelessness in New Haven. So I don't mean to talk so much about Yale. You're at a great school too, but Yale stomps around the world like an elite institution, and I think it doesn't have to be quite elite in all ways that it functions. And I think architects in some ways suffer from a similar problem. It's seen as an elite profession. I don't think that has to be the case, and I really think that that is not how architects should function in the world. Architecture can be, in fact, I think it must be good as architecture. It must be good as design. But it can also do good, sometimes by the program, sometimes by impact, sometimes by presence. In fact, I would say, I think a component of built environment social justice is actually beauty for all, not just for people who live in certain places. In my teaching career, I've loved getting to see the emergence of new talent, because tomorrow's architects, that's most of you, are going to have to engage with the broader architecture of the whole world of the built environment with flexibility and creativity. Here's Columbus. This is supposed to play. Let's see what happens. It's a tiny little cut, but you saw the building earlier. Yeah. This is what Brian quoted, but it's clearly not. No? Okay, I apologize. It's not playing. Basically what happens is the woman on the left is the star of the movie, and she talks about how this building changed her life. And I mean, that was really nice for me, and that sounds selfish and self-important, I don't mean it that way, but I think if what everyone in this room does when they build buildings is hope that that building can impact somebody's life, then we're really doing what we should do as architects. So 1 hour on the nose. Thank you very much.
See the movie. I just want to confess that I was in a small theater as well, and I heard a couple of references to Deborah Berke and Sarah and all that, but it wasn't until she said she's amazing that I burst out laughing, and several people said shh. So I didn't burst out laughing because it's just familiarity. She's my friend. We were talking about her in a movie in the theater, so that's why I just touched it.
Yeah,
I gave you permission to, but I'm sorry. There must be questions out there. Do you have a couple seconds to
absolutely.
answer some questions?
If everybody wants to take the heat, it's pretty hot in here.
Tell her she's amazing.
No, please don't do that. It really makes me very self-conscious.
Come on, be brave. Jacques Rory. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
He's my ringer here.
I have a question. What is some bad advice or bad recommendations you give in your expertise?
I heard the first part of that, as in what's bad advice, but I didn't hear the
bad recommendations that you hear in your area of expertise, whether that be academics or actually practicing architecture.
bad advice. As a teacher and an academic, some of the bad advice I hear is that you have to go to a big city and get a job with a big firm in order to become an architect. That's just not true, that's bad advice. And you might learn more at a smaller firm where you get to do more and be engaged in more aspects of building a building from early concept to being on site during construction and be in the room with the client. All of this really helps. And I also think that the idea that big cities are the only place to be, and I would include Washington on that list, but certainly New York and Los Angeles is also not true, because in New York and Los Angeles, unless you're Frank Gehry, mayor, not going to take your phone call, but in secondary and tertiary cities, architects can call the mayor, have an impact on what happens in terms of planning and zoning and what buildings get built, and be on neighborhood committees and really change the place. So I'm hoping that, listen, I want really talented people to come work for me, so only listen to part of this, but in truth, I think you can sometimes have a greater impact by not following the lure of going to move to LA and work for Frank Gehry, or move to New York and work for KBF, you know.
Thank you so much for your talk. I was wondering if you could talk more about how you decide what to keep and what to make new in a building.
Well, sometimes it's when the owner of the project is going for historic tax credits, you don't get to choose. The state historic preservation people choose for you, and then you have lots of long arguments with them about whether they're right. Some successful, some not. So that's a bit of a joke, and it's not meant to insult anybody here who works for SHPO, any SHPO anywhere in the country. But sometimes there is flexibility, and sometimes there isn't. I like to keep the things that have impactful character, that speak to the past. Sometimes it shows craftsmanship, sometimes it shows time and age. A little bit like in the hotel in Buffalo. The thought that you would give up those wide hallways when that was the entire story of the building, was people regained their mental health by sitting there in the sun. See, that you had to keep those hallways. So sometimes that huge scale, and sometimes that tiny little detail, like the patterned floor and the curving hallway, stay in that same building. So when it's good and when it has meaning, whatever the meaning might be, you keep it. we don't intentionally destroy much. And in fact, in the public school project, putting the big theater on the roof meant that more of the building that had small regular classrooms in it, you know, an old public school with a center hall and classroom, 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 you could keep more of that character by putting the theater on the top floor. It was cheaper to lift off the roofs. It turned out to be a good idea for other reasons as well. And then for yet other reasons, you drew people through the whole building to get to the single largest space, so they saw work that wasn't just what they were going to see, but the work of painters, the work of dancers, the work of other people who were in the building. So oftentimes the decision process leads to other good results, even though it wasn't the sole goal of that.
Hi, thanks for the great presentation. I think the conversations today across all the panelists that we had earlier really sort of got me thinking about a question I ask a lot, which is about what is the role of an architect, right? We're in such a broad profession to some degree, and what we come out of school with is much more of a way of thinking than it is sort of a skill set like other professions have. And so being in both academia and as a practitioner, I would love to hear what you think are sort of the key and critical elements in the way that architectural education is or should be evolving to keep up with what it means to be an architect today. You know, we started as master builder, we've transformed into, you know, thought leaders and facilitators, and we're kind of a little bit of everything. But how do you think academia what should we focus on to keep up with that?
I think that's a great question. Actually, I was on this panel last night in New York, which had an architect, that was me, engineer who actually also had a degree in architect, a structural engineer, a developer, and a contractor. And the questions posed to us were by the guy who teaches at Yale, who teaches a professional practice class. And it was essentially exactly your question. So first I would say at the beginning of what you said well, you don't learn that many skills. You actually have learned a lot more skills than you know. And I hope you have this good school, and they're teaching you all kinds of things. The thing you're probably paying the least attention to while you're in school is your professional practice class, and it'll be the thing you need to know the most about when you get out into the world.
I should warn you that I'm actually a faculty, so I graduated nearly 8 years ago.
Oh, you look so young.
And you cannot have her. You cannot steal her. That's it.
Well, you're up there.
Yeah, you can't steal her.
So I'm asking sort of on behalf of both what the students should be thinking about, but also as faculty members, the things that we should be adjusting in how we
Okay, so all right, so 2 parts. There's the architecture that looks like this, has spelled with a capital A, mostly built by people who you know by first name, like Frank and Zaha, right? And that's architecture, and that's great. And for many years, most academic models were about creating people to do that, or to work for those people who did that. And that's good, and that's still a model, and that's a good thing. But I think architecture actually looks like this, to the point you're making, and I think you're probably agreeing with, which could go from nanotechnology, jewelry design, interior design, scale-wise this way, all the way over to regional planning, and somewhere over here, you know, there's all adaptive reuse, preservation, all of that is architecture. I think if this is who you're meant to be, good for you. But if that's not who you're meant to be, don't feel bad about it, and don't feel that you have somehow let down yourself or what school told you had to be because you're not in here, you're here, or you're way over there, you're way over there. It's all fine if you're contributing in some way to the improvement of the built environment, and I mean that really broadly, from little things to giant things. I think so that's one part of the answer. The other part of the answer is, what do I think architecture is going to look like in the future? I do think AI is going to have an impact. This came up in the panel last night, where the structural engineer said, you know, in 10 to 15 years, they might not need structural engineers, right? Just plug in all stuff and boom, good. I think they will still need architects, because creative nonlinear thinking is something they need us to do, at least still for a bit into the future. But I do think that practice itself is going to be just as this definition should give way to this definition, while not forgetting that this could be part of it. I think This model also comes with a very traditional fee-for-service practice, way of practicing architecture. You know, you hire me, I design it, I give you drawings, you pay me, we're done. And I think, one, architects have to define a broader range of services. I keep using my hands to describe this, broader range of services. One, because we end up often providing those for free, which is stupid, but also because it pays to be involved earlier in the decision-making process, and it definitely pays to stay involved after occupancy. But also there are ways, whether it's through designing products or investing in projects as a way to trade the profit part of your fee or something like that, where this endless joke of architects being underpaid and poor and, you know, highly respected, poorly rewarded profession could begin to change if we could think outside the limiting box of a fee-for-service model. So I know I'm getting way off track from what you're talking about, but that's, I think, for us to survive as a profession, we have to change how we think about that.
Up here.
Hi.
With your background on working on a building like the one in Buffalo, what is your opinion on the changes that will have to be made to Notre Dame? Do you think that it should be a rehabilitation, or do you think that it should be renovated?
That's a really interesting question, and I think it's a really good and intelligent question. I would say my gut response, and I've heard that they're going to do a competition for a new spire. I think that's stupid. The spire wasn't original in the first place. I personally think they should restore the building, acknowledge pretty much true to its form, not in the Deborah Berke model of make the glass box. Because the fire itself didn't come out of a historic event or a change even in, how should we say, a form of government or a revolution or a war. The fire didn't last very long. It did a lot of damage. It was a tragedy. And the building is a cultural icon. It's probably a significant part of the economy of Paris and therefore of France as a tourist destination. So I think they should restore the building. I think one very important thing that's gotten a ton of attention is not who should restore it as in which architecture they choose, but who should pay to restore it. And I think the outrage both among many of the French and people worldwide that, you know, choose your number, 800 million euros, whatever the crazy number was that came in a day to restore a building owned by the Catholic Church, which is a wealthy global institution, strikes me as is a bad use of that money, and that if those wealthy organizations and individuals are that passionate about the importance of the built environment, they could start by fixing up the periphery of Paris and take it beyond that. I believe that Notre Dame should be fixed and made a place where people will once again exalt in visiting.
Hi, my name is Juanita. Some of the beautiful projects, and you could just see from the buildings that they had beautiful bones. How can we be thinking, as we potentially design new buildings, be thinking about bones that can be adapted and reused and made flexible, so that we're not just tearing down and rebuilding, but thinking about good bones for the future?
That's a really good question, and I would say that many of these buildings with good bones had really specific programs: insane asylum, car assembly plant, public school, and I didn't show you really any with the exception of Cummins of our new work. Maybe I should do a new lecture where I only have new buildings in it. So I don't think it's about building quote-unquote flexible space. I think it's about building true to program. I think particularly in our culture, meaning American culture, we build 20-year buildings, but most of the buildings you saw that we have changed the use of were built initially as 80 or 100-year buildings in terms of the attitudes about materials, quality of construction, quality of design. And I think it's the throwaway. So I think it's actually less about the bones and more about committing to a building being a part of the landscape for a long time. And therefore, you build it well out of good materials, not poorly out of inexpensive. Not about the price, attitudinally, how you build it so that it lasts long enough that it can be used again for something different.
One more question.
First of all, thank you so much for coming here and speaking to us today. That was very informative, and I found this building very interesting. So my question more focuses on your educational background as dean now of Yale's Architecture School. You mentioned people studying architecture and going to other fields of work, and I myself am planning to do that. And I've heard several people talk about ways in which architecture school benefits all fields of study and thought. How do you think studying architecture changes the way we think for the better, regardless of the direction we choose to go?
I am a strong believer in what you just said. Thank you for the compliment and thank you for the good question. I think precisely because of what I said at the very beginning of the lecture, lectures are linear, but architecture isn't, in my opinion. I think that architecture school teaches non-linear thinking. It teaches reiterative thinking. It teaches layered thinking as you first sketch an idea, and then you add to it detail, materiality, structure. I don't know, some days you get there in studio, probably not all that often, but it's that you go back and you look again and you change in that process that I think is very different from the training in other fields that allows architects to go out and do many different things with that education. And there's one other piece of it. I don't know, you guys probably spend most of your time with a mouse in your hand, but you should continue to sketch. And I think being able to think, in fact, I'd almost say the opposite, to be able to think without a pencil in your hand is a sign of failure. And you should think at all times while doodling, not doodling mindlessly, but thinking through, visualizing at all times. Nobody has to ever see the drawing but you, but it's a way to communicate to yourself visually where your thoughts are. And I think that's something architecture school teaches that you should never lose no matter what field you end up going into.
Deborah, I want to thank you. It's been 31 years in the making to get you to come back. We hope that you will be back sooner than 31 years, but if in 31 years from now you want us to come back and are able to come back, then do come back. But we hope we can have you back again sooner. This has been a wonderful end to a really intense lecture series this year. I want to thank you, and I want to thank the panel participants this afternoon for being here. This has been a great afternoon. Let's give a final round of applause. So tomorrow morning, this space is being used as part of Maryland Day, and I just ask that those of you that are seated out there to please take